A racist cop attacks Mike Tyson's daughter, but he has no idea who her father is. What happens next will leave you speechless. The wrath of a legend, a father's justice. The sun blazed over the bustling streets of Ironwood, a city where the pulse of life never slowed. The air hummed with the chatter of market vendors, the sizzle of street food, and the distant honking of impatient drivers. It was a typical summer afternoon, yet beneath the surface tensions simmered, unseen but always present. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, Mike Tyson, the former heavyweight champion, stood in his driveway, basking in the simple joy of family life. His 19-year-old daughter, Keyna Tyson, was the light of his world, sharp, strong-willed, and full of life. Their bond was unshakable, forged through years of love, laughter, and unwavering support. "Hey, Dad, I'm heading to the market. Need anything?" Keyna called out, her bright smile infectious. Mike grinned, crossing his arms over his massive chest. "Yeah, surprise me, champ, but don't take too long. I can't enjoy movie night without my favorite snack supplier." Keyna chuckled, giving him a playful salute before hopping into her sleek black SUV. As she pulled out, Mike shook his head with amusement, unaware that the next time he saw her, his world would erupt in fury. A fateful encounter. Keyna arrived at the Ironwood Farmers Market, the air rich with the scent of fresh produce and sizzling delicacies. She weaved through the colorful stalls, greeting vendors with warm familiarity. Her presence was effortless. She belonged here, just like everyone else. But someone disagreed. Officer Lucas Riker, a man whose badge gave him a false sense of superiority, prowled the streets, seeking an excuse to remind the wrong kind of people of their place. His eyes locked onto Keyna the moment she stepped out of her car. A black woman in an expensive vehicle, confident and unbothered. That alone was enough to set off his alarms. Riker adjusted his belt, sneering as he approached. The crisp uniform on his frame hid the darkness within, a man who saw authority as a tool for control, not protection. Keyna was selecting fresh apples when she felt the weight of his presence. She turned, her sharp instincts alerting her before he even spoke. "You got a permit to loiter around here?" Riker's voice dripped with condescension. Keyna raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? I'm shopping, just like everyone else." Riker stepped closer, his lip curling. "Shopping, huh? People like you always think you're above the rules, walking around like you own the place." Keyna took a slow breath. She had heard these words before, always from men like him, always in places where she had every right to be. She remained calm, not because she wasn't furious, but because she knew better than to give him what he wanted. "I'm not interested in whatever power trip you're on," she said coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse me." She turned to leave, but Riker blocked her path. The air around them grew thick as onlookers began to take notice. Some reached for their phones, sensing trouble. "Where do you think you're going?" Riker barked. Keyna's patience thinned. "I don't have time for this," she said firmly. "You're harassing me." Riker's face darkened, his hand twitching near his baton. "Did you just accuse me of harassment?" The market grew quieter, people pausing mid-transaction, eyes darting toward the confrontation. "I call it like I see it," Keyna shot back. That was it. Riker's control snapped. With explosive force, he swung his fist into her face. The impact was brutal. Keyna barely registered the searing pain before she was on the ground, her vision blurred, the taste of blood sharp on her tongue. Gasps erupted from the crowd, horrified murmurs rippling through the market. Someone screamed. A voice from the crowd shouted, "That's Mike Tyson's daughter!" Riker's smirk faltered for just a second. Then he sneered, "I don't care who she is." But he should have, because at that moment a phone buzzed on a coffee table back at the Tyson home, and as Mike Tyson read the frantic message, his hands tightened into fists. A storm was coming, and Riker had just lit the fuse. The breaking point. A father's fury awakens. Keyna Tyson had faced discrimination before, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer hostility radiating from Officer Lucas Riker. His grip on power had warped his sense of duty, turning it into an unchecked force of intimidation. The moment Keyna challenged him, she had become his next target. The crowd grew larger, their murmurs turning into full-throated protests. But Riker remained unfazed, his arrogance bolstered by the belief that no one would dare to stand against him. "You think you can just walk away from me?" Riker sneered, his voice coiling around the onlookers like a snake. "Where's your ID? Hand it over." "Now!" Keyna exhaled sharply, her fingers fumbling in her purse. Not out of fear, but because she knew what this was. A trap. "Hurry up!" Riker barked, his face reddening with impatience. Keyna's heartbeat pounded in her ears, but she refused to let him see any weakness. She squared her shoulders, lifting her gaze to meet his with unwavering defiance. "I have done nothing wrong," she said, her voice steady. "You're harassing me. You're abusing your power. I know my rights." The statement hit Riker like a slap in the face. His jaw clenched, his nostrils flaring as he stepped closer, invading her space. "You want to make this difficult?" he hissed, his breath hot with anger. "I can make this very difficult for you." The tension around them was suffocating. The crowd, frozen in horror, began whispering among themselves, their fear giving way to something more powerful. Rage. Keyna felt it too, a burning heat rising in her chest. This wasn't just about her anymore, this was about all the people who had been silenced before her. She reached into her pocket, but not for her ID. For her phone. Raising it high, she pressed record. "I'm recording this," she declared, her voice ringing through the marketplace. The words sent a jolt through the crowd. Whispers turned into nods of approval. More hands reached for their phones, cameras flipping open, lenses focused on the abuse of power unfolding before them. Riker's eyes darkened with rage. "Put that phone down!" he snapped, his voice edged with panic. "You don't want this to go any further." But Keyna didn't flinch. She held her ground, her phone a weapon far more powerful than any badge he hid behind. Then, with the force of a predator striking its prey, Riker lunged. His hand snatched the phone from her grasp, and with a cruel smirk, he smashed it to the ground. The screen exploded into shards, the crunch echoing through the stunned silence of the market. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. Someone cursed. Others pulled their phones closer, recording every detail. "You can't do that!" Keyna shouted, fury rising in her chest. "You're a police officer. You're supposed to protect people, not assault them." Riker's lips curled into a venomous sneer. "I told you to put it down. You didn't listen." Keyna's eyes blazed. "And now you're going to pay for what you've done." The moment the words left her lips, his fist came flying. With a sickening crack, Riker's knuckles slammed into the side of Keyna's face. The force sent her reeling, her vision spinning, the world tilting. Her body hit the ground with a thud, the pain radiating from her cheek like fire. A wave of silence crashed over the market. Then, chaos erupted. People screamed. Someone shouted, "He hit her!" Another yelled, "She's just a kid!" Keyna, her body trembling, clutched her face, feeling the sting of Riker's brutality seeping into her skin. Tears blurred her vision, but her spirit refused to break. "Please," she gasped, "someone help me." But Riker towered over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. "No one's going to help you," he sneered. The words sent shockwaves through the crowd, and just like that, fear turned into fury. A man, his hands clenched into fists, stepped forward. "You can't do that. She's just a kid. Leave her alone." Riker spun toward him, his face twisted with unchecked aggression. "Stay out of this, or you'll be next." But it was too late. The bystanders were no longer afraid. They pulled out their phones. They stepped closer. They demanded answers. They refused to be silent. And thousands of miles away, in a quiet suburban home, Mike Tyson's phone buzzed. The moment he read the message, his world tilted. His grip on the phone tightened. His fists clenched. And the fury of a legend, the wrath of a father, was about to be unleashed. The wrath of a father unleashed. The sharp sting of Officer Lucas Riker's punch still burned on Keyna Tyson's cheek. She sat on the curb, her body trembling from both pain and fury. The world around her blurred as tears welled in her eyes, but her spirit, her father's spirit, would not break. She slowly turned her gaze to Riker, the officer standing over her with smug arrogance, his uniform barely concealing the monster within. "Why?" Keyna whispered, her voice barely audible but laced with defiance. "Why are you doing this?" Riker's lips twisted into a sneer. His hate was a poison, dripping from his words as he crouched slightly, lowering himself just enough to make sure she saw the malice in his eyes. "Maybe this will teach you some respect," he spat. "Next time you think about challenging a police officer, you'll think twice." A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd. They were watching, filming, witnessing a crime unfold. Keyna clenched her fists. The taste of blood lingered in her mouth, but it was nothing compared to the rage swelling in her chest. "Respect?" she snarled, her voice shaking with barely contained fury. "You assaulted me. You're the one who deserves no respect." The crowd erupted in agreement. Voices rose, some furious, some afraid. The air crackled with unrest. And then a phone rang. Miles away, inside his home, Mike Tyson sat in his living room, enjoying a rare moment of peace. His fingers absent-mindedly drummed against the coffee table as he flipped through channels. Then his phone vibrated. He reached for it, expecting it to be a friend, a casual conversation, something mundane. Instead, a frantic, breathless voice came through the line. "Mr. Tyson, listen to me. Your daughter—" The voice broke off, filled with panic. "She's been attacked. A cop hit her. You need to get here, right now." The words slammed into him like a heavyweight punch to the gut. The world around him froze. Mike shot up from his chair, his veins turning to ice, then fire. His voice, usually so measured, was deadly calm. "Who?" The caller hesitated, knowing full well what he was about to unleash. "Officer Riker, sir." Silence. Then a single, low growl. Riker. The name burned itself into his mind. The last shred of restraint shattered. His fingers gripped his car keys so tightly his knuckles turned white. His breath slowed, his body humming with an old familiar sensation. The beast awakening. By the time his car peeled out of the driveway, Mike Tyson was no longer a man. He was a storm. The arrival, a reckoning begins. When Mike Tyson pulled up to the marketplace, time stood still. Keyna sat on the curb, her face swollen, her body trembling. Around her, the crowd buzzed with outrage. Some people comforted her, others stared in shock at the scene that had unfolded. And then they saw him. The tension in the air shifted. Mike Tyson, the former heavyweight champion of the world, was here. A father, a warrior, and he was furious. "Keyna!" His voice boomed across the marketplace as he sprinted toward his daughter. He dropped to one knee, his hands cupping her face, his eyes burning with worry and fury. "Are you okay?" Before she could respond, a familiar, arrogant voice cut through the air. Riker stepped forward, his cocky smirk still plastered on his face. "This your daddy?" he taunted. "Guess disrespect runs in the family." The crowd gasped. Mike Tyson turned, and in that moment, the temperature dropped. Riker was about to learn the meaning of fear. Mike rose to his full height, his massive frame towering over the sneering officer. His body was still, his face unreadable, but his fists tightened like steel traps. The champion had returned to the ring. "What the hell did you do to my daughter?" Mike's voice was low, steady, and utterly terrifying. Riker, still too blind with arrogance to recognize his mistake, laughed. "She needed to learn a lesson," he sneered, "and maybe you do too. You think you can intimidate me, Tyson? You're a washed-up has-been?" The crowd fell silent. Every single person there, every soul watching, knew what was about to happen, and Riker had no idea the storm he had just called down upon himself. The wrath of a father Mike took a slow step forward. Riker's bravado flickered for the first time. Mike's voice was a whisper of thunder. "Wrong move, Riker." The crowd held its breath. The champion had arrived, and justice was coming, justice in the ring of the streets. The crowd, electric with anticipation, instinctively parted, forming an arena around the two men. The legend versus the lawless enforcer. Officer Lucas Riker, still brimming with misplaced arrogance, sneered, his lips curling into an ugly smirk. The bruises on Keyna Tyson's face were a badge of his unchecked power, a sick trophy he thought would go unnoticed. But now, her father had arrived. Mike Tyson wasn't just here to fight, he was here to end this. Riker, emboldened by the badge on his chest, lunged forward, throwing a wild, undisciplined punch, his fist fueled by nothing but desperation. Big mistake. Like a shadow in the night, Mike dodged effortlessly, his body moving with the practiced grace of a predator. Riker's momentum betrayed him, sending him stumbling forward. "Damn it!" he spat, turning back, rage twisting his face. But Mike Tyson wasn't just a man standing before him. He was a force of nature, a tidal wave of fury, a father with nothing to lose and everything to protect. The champion took a step forward, and for the first time, Riker felt it. Fear. Mike's voice was a low growl, measured, merciless, and final. "Wrong move, Riker." A cold chill swept through the air. The once roaring crowd fell into a stunned silence. The only sound left was the distant hum of the city and the pounding of Riker's own heartbeat. "You're going to pay for what you've done." Mike's fist shot forward, a lightning-fast cannonball of righteous fury, and connected squarely with Riker's jaw. The impact sent the officer reeling back, his body collapsing against the pavement like a house of cards caught in a storm. The crowd exploded into cheers, a roar of justice shaking the very foundation of the streets. Camera phones flashed. The world was watching. But Riker, drowning in humiliation, refused to accept defeat. With a snarl, he ripped his baton from his belt, eyes wild with fury. "You think this is over?" he spat, swinging viciously. Another mistake. Mike Tyson was too fast, too experienced, too deadly. With inhuman reflexes, Mike caught the baton mid-swing, the impact ringing out like a bell of judgment. Riker's eyes widened in disbelief. The champion was toying with him now. Mike didn't hesitate. He struck again. 1, a brutal jab to Riker's chest. 2, a devastating left hook that sent him stumbling. 3, a crushing right hand to the side of his face. The crowd gasped as Riker crumpled. The once untouchable officer, feared by many, now lay sprawled on the cold pavement, gasping for breath, his power shattered. Mike, his breathing steady, towered over him. "You think you can hurt my daughter and walk away?" His voice was a storm rolling in, the final warning before the downpour. Riker, his face a mess of bruises, tried to scramble back, but there was nowhere left to run. "Not today. Not ever." The weight of his words hung thick in the air, a sentence passed down by the streets themselves. And then, sirens. The law finally arrives. The sound of screeching tires filled the market square as 2 squad cars came to an abrupt stop. A cloud of dust and tension rose as uniformed officers poured out, their faces etched with disbelief as they took in the scene before them. The crowd, still buzzing with energy, pointed toward Riker. Phones raised, evidence streaming live to thousands, millions across the world. Officer Daniel Briggs, a seasoned sergeant, pushed his way through the sea of people, his gaze locking onto the fallen officer. His jaw tightened, his stomach churned. Riker had finally gone too far. Briggs turned to the crowd, his voice firm but steady. Who saw what happened? The response was immediate. Dozens of voices rose in unison. Riker attacked that girl. He hit her without cause. Tyson was defending his daughter. Briggs knew what had to be done. He stepped toward Riker, whose face was twisted in pain, confusion, and rapidly fading arrogance. "You know the drill, Riker," Briggs said coldly, reaching for his cuffs. The fallen officer's face contorted in shock. No, I was doing my job. I was—" "Shut up." Briggs' voice cut through him like a blade. With a click of cold steel, the very same handcuffs Riker had used to oppress others were snapped onto his own wrists. The crowd erupted. Justice was being served. As Riker was dragged toward the squad car, his eyes darted frantically, searching for a way out. But there was none. The law had finally caught up to him. A father's love, stronger than any fist. Mike turned away from the scene, his focus solely on Keyna. He knelt beside her, his hands gentle as they cupped her face. "Are you okay, baby?" His voice, despite everything, was soft, full of love. Keyna, tears threatening to spill, nodded. "I am now." The crowd watched as father and daughter embraced, their bond stronger than ever. And as Mike helped Keyna to her feet, he made a promise. One not just to his daughter, but to every person who had ever suffered under the abuse of power. "No one messes with my family. Ever." The marketplace erupted into cheers, applause, and chants of, "Tyson! Tyson! Tyson!" This was more than a fight. This was a victory, and it was only the beginning. Officer Lucas Riker, once feared, now defeated, lay sprawled on the pavement, his face a mosaic of bruises and his breath ragged with humiliation. The air was thick with justice. Officer Daniel Briggs, his jaw clenched, strode forward, his uniform pristine, his authority unshaken. He stopped just inches away from Riker's crumpled body, looking down at the disgraced officer with cold, unwavering eyes. "Riker, you know the drill." His voice cut through the tension like a blade. The weight of those words crushed Riker's remaining arrogance. Briggs reached for his cuffs, the sound of cold steel clicking like a judge's gavel. "You're under arrest for assault and misconduct. You're coming with us." Riker, his pride bleeding as much as his swollen lip, whined like a cornered animal. "He attacked me. I was doing my job. Enough." Briggs' tone was sharp, final. The crowd, once silenced by fear, now roared with approval. Dozens of phones recorded, capturing every second, ensuring there would be no rewriting of history this time. Truth had spoken, and the world was listening. Riker's protests were useless. The moment the videos hit the internet, his career, his power, his reign of fear was over. The badge on his chest, once a shield, was now a relic of disgrace. Briggs tightened the cuffs, his grip firm. "You've spent years thinking that badge made you untouchable." His voice was low, unforgiving. "But power isn't meant for abuse, Riker. It's meant to protect." As Riker was hauled to his feet, his eyes darted desperately across the crowd, looking for one last escape, one last defense. There was none. The community he once oppressed now stood together, stronger than ever. And Mike Tyson stood at the center of it all, a towering symbol of what happens when the strong fight for the weak. A father's love, unbreakable. The moment Riker disappeared into the back of the squad car, Mike turned away. His battle wasn't with a coward like him. His only concern was Keyna. He knelt beside her, gently brushing her hair back, his hands soft, his eyes full of pain and love. "Are you okay, baby?" His voice was tender, despite the storm still raging inside him. Keyna, her face bruised but her spirit unbroken, looked up at him. Tears welled in her eyes, not just from pain, but from relief. I am now. The crowd, moved by the moment, fell into silence. What they saw was more than victory. They saw a father, a protector, a legend, holding his child with a love that no power on earth could break. And in that moment, Keyna understood something. Her father wasn't just a fighter in the ring, he was a fighter in life, and he had just won the most important battle of all. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing freely, her hands clutching his shirt like she had as a little girl. "Thank you, Dad." Mike, his arms like a fortress, held her tighter. "No one messes with my family. Ever." His words rang through the streets, a warning, a promise, a declaration of war against injustice. And the crowd erupted. "Tyson! Tyson! Tyson!" The name echoed like a battle cry, bouncing off the buildings, spilling into the streets, rising through the night like thunder. Mike Tyson wasn't just a champion in the ring anymore. He was a symbol, a warrior, a man who stood when no one else dared. And the world was watching. The fall of a tyrant. The rise of a movement. By the time dawn broke over the city, the videos had spread like wildfire. The footage of Riker's brutality, his downfall, his arrest, was everywhere. The world was enraged. Activists, politicians, reporters, everyone was talking. Within hours, the mayor had no choice but to address the nation. Officer Lucas Riker has been stripped of his badge and is under full criminal investigation. The department scrambled, trying to contain the damage, but it was too late. The people had seen too much, heard too much. This wasn't just about Keyna Tyson anymore. This was about every person who had suffered under the hands of unchecked power. And for the first time, they weren't just victims. They were warriors. Mike Tyson's stand had set something in motion, and nothing would stop it now. That night, back at the Tyson household, a quiet calm settled over the living room. The world was still buzzing, but inside these walls, Keyna was safe. Mike sat on the couch, his body still tense from the battle, but his heart full. Keyna, wrapped in a soft blanket, rested her head against his shoulder. She was still bruised, still sore, but in this moment, she was just a daughter with her father again. For the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled. And then she nudged him playfully. "Hey, Dad, remember those snacks for movie night?" Mike chuckled, shaking his head. "You're telling me you got beat up, went viral, and still want snacks?" Keyna grinned, despite the soreness in her cheek. "Yeah. Popcorn." Mike laughed, a real deep, unburdened laugh. For the first time all day, the weight of the world lifted from his shoulders. "I'll get the popcorn, you pick the movie." The television flickered, filling the room with soft light, as father and daughter sank into the comfort of home. Outside, the world continued to fight. But in here, for one precious night, they had each other. And that was everything. Lesson from the story: standing against injustice and the power of unity. This story teaches us that injustice thrives when good people stay silent, but when courage meets unity, real change happens. Racism and abuse of power are still present in society, but truth and justice always prevail when people stand up, speak out, and support one another. Mike Tyson's love for his daughter and his refusal to let injustice go unanswered remind us that family is worth fighting for, and no one should ever abuse power to oppress others. Change begins when we refuse to back down and demand accountability, because silence enables oppression, but unity destroys it. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe Undercover Insights channel.